Hi, everyone in Business Law. I thought I'd put up a quick review of Chapter 8 consideration. Um, it's an important chapter. It goes to the essence of the heart, if you will, of contract law outside of the meeting of the minds. The meeting of the minds is always the most important aspect of a contract, the mutual agreement. But it has to be supported by consideration through competent parties that have capacity. We're kind of going through the elements from Chapter 5, what every contract needs to have in order to be valid. All contracts need to have consideration to be enforceable. So what is consideration? The Latin term for it is quid pro quo, something for something. If something's not exchanged in terms of a legal detriment or a legal right being changed between the parties, there's not a valid contract because it lacks consideration. And usually, like in a sales contract, you give me $500, I give you a snowblower. That's the consideration, snowblower in exchange for the money. In a services contract, you'll pay me $3,000 to do your divorce. I'm providing a service, you're providing me money. That's the consideration flowing back and forth between the parties. Now, what if one day you said, geez, tomorrow I'm painting my barn. I got to get it done before the weather turns. Be great if I get a bunch of friends to come out and help. And we're all sitting around the dinner table. And we all say, we're going to come out. We'll be all there by 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. We all agree. We all shake hands. Some there's witnesses. It's videotaped. You even write it down and sign it. For those of you that think it's essential to have a contract to do that, you don't in most circumstances. None of us show up tomorrow. None of us paint. Can he sue us? No, my friend can't sue us because we were going to paint for him. What was he going to do for us? Nothing. I know it sounds kind of salacious or inappropriate, meaning what's in it for me? But that is what contracting means. Something has to be in it for both sides, no matter how trivial. Both parties have to change their legal position in some way, whether it's giving up money, services, or rights. What I mean by rights, I always fantasize about living at the ocean, and chances are I'll never afford a place right on the water. But what if I'm close enough to have a view? And I'm up on my second floor deck, and I'm looking out, and I can see the Atlantic Ocean. I love it. My neighbor, who's a lot wealthier than I am, lives closer to the coast. And she decides she wants to put up a 3-story structure, and it's going to block my view to the ocean. And let's assume that the zoning provides for that kind of height. She's allowed to do that. And I hear about it, and I talk to her. We're friendly, and I said, geez, if you build that, I won't be able to see the Atlantic Ocean from my deck. And she goes, geez, too bad. And I'll say, you know what? Can we compromise? What if I gave you $10,000? Could you build it in a jagged way or a certain design so it's pitched in a different way so I can still keep part of that angle and still get a slice of that ocean when I sit and drink my wine at night before the sun sets out in the west? Even though the Atlantic faces the east, I'll still see it behind me, I guess. The sun sets in the west, it rises in the east, but I'll be looking out to the east. And what if she said yes? Well, what is she giving to me? She's surrendering the right to build an obstruction to my view, and I'm giving her money in exchange. That's called deference or refraining from doing a legal right. It happens in like personal injury cases all the time. I rear-end your car, I damaged the back of your bumper, and you're a little sore, so you think you're going to miss a couple days from work. Now, you give me nothing in terms of services or money, but you promise to give up a right. You won't sue me. You have a legitimate lawsuit there in exchange for $1,000. Is that valid consideration? Yes. It's an exchange of legal detriment flowing back and forth between both parties. Most of us think of it as money in exchange for services, money in exchange for goods, goods for goods, but it doesn't have to be. It could just be a change in legal circumstances. And the book does a pretty good job on talking about some of the things that aren't valid consideration, because it's very important to distinguish what those aren't. But it also talks about this concept of what about adequacy of consideration. Generally, the law does not care if there's gross disparity in consideration. So say if you were going to sell me, I don't think I have anything valuable here on my desk. We'll say this was a brand new iPhone. I don't know what a brand new iPhone costs, go for probably close to $1,000, right? What if it's brand new? It's like still in the box. I haven't even done whatever it is to set it up. And I haven't peeled off the plastic, and I agree to sell it to you for $1. Is that valid consideration? The law would generally say yes. We don't care that people have made a huge bargain or got a sort of a windfall out of a good negotiation. But sometimes that kind of gross disparity can help prove maybe I'm lacking in mental competency, or maybe I was somehow tricked, or there's a mistake of material fact, which we'll talk about in the next chapter. But other than that, on its face, we don't care that one party seems to have gotten a really, really super deal and the other party's gotten a really bad deal. Law doesn't care. That's how we live sometimes in a capitalist system is, you know, buy low and sell high if you can, and buy as low as you can and sell as high as you can. And there's nothing usually illegal about that, as long as you're not doing any kind of trickery or taking advantage of someone with mental limitations or intoxication or duress, fraud, or the like. So let's talk about some things that aren't consideration that surprise a lot of people. Partial payment of just past due debt. I owe you $5,000, and I approach you and say, geez, times have been really tough. I know you owe you $5,000 and it's payable right now today on today's date. Would you take $4,000? And you, because you're a nice person, say, all right, I'll take $4,000. So I give you the $4,000, I leave. Can you sue me the next day or right really that instant for the balance of the $1,000 that you just waived? I was going to say, no. Yeah, you can. Because I owe you $5,000. What have I given you? $4,000. Well, they reduced their debt by $1,000. What did I give them for that contractual right? I've given them nothing. It's not binding upon them. So partial payment of a past due debt is generally not enforceable. So you got to be very cautious. You owe somebody some money and you say, I know you owe you $5,000. I know it's payable today, but will you accept $2,500? Yeah, I'll accept $2,500. It's not enforceable. They could sue you for the balance. This happens quite a bit. Are there ways to make it valid? Yeah, well, the law does recognize some exceptions to the lack of consideration of those circumstances. One is if there's a promissory note, a written document saying you owe me $5,000, and I'm saying right now, will you take $4,000? And you say yes, and you possess the note, the IOU, and you write on the note paid in full, and you sign it. You give me that note, and I give you the $4,000. The law there says that kind of showing of commitment to take a lesser amount of money is a sort of a legal fiction for consideration. So one is if it's evidenced by a note and the note is surrendered to the debtor. That's one. The other is classic, the amounts in dispute. Jim, you owe me $3,000. I think I owe you $25,000 because you never did that last aspect of the job. The amount's in dispute, so I'm going to give you $25,000. And if you say you accept it, because the amount was in dispute, in theory, we're giving up our legal right to dispute the claim, and that's an artificial way of saying there's consideration in that circumstance. I already talked about the note. The other one's called a composition of creditors. I owe 10 different people 10 different amounts of money. They all agree to take 20% of what they're owed by agreeing as a whole to take a reduced amount. That is deemed to be valid consideration because everyone's agreeing to take a reduced amount. It's called a composition of creditors. It's just something the law made up as an exception to the rule, recognizing that sometimes people that are so much in debt, in order to keep them viable in either business or just in society to avoid bankruptcy, you might want to take a reduction through this uniform agreement called the composition of creditors. And the law says that will be valid even though there's no true consideration of taking a lesser amount of money. A gift. Hey, I know I owe you $5,000. Would you willing to waive the other $1,000 as a gift to me? But you have to have evidence that happened, maybe on videotape or in written, or waiving the other $1,000 as a gift. You can give people up to I don't think it's $14,000 a year without tax ramifications. But you have to have proof that it was a gift, meaning a gratuitous transfer of rights. That's all it is. And then the other one's a secured note. Look, I know I owe you $100,000. But would you accept $75,000 payable next year, and I give you a mortgage on my house to protect that interest in that $75,000? That's a new real form of consideration, really, and it's created as an exception of the part payment of a past due debt. Hard to say. The other things that are insufficient consideration, this is classic, performing what you're already supposed to do. So say we were having traditional classes at the Mountain. I used to love teaching business law at the Mountain live, talking to you guys, walking around the room like a jacked up on my coffee. And I always like this example, and this happened a few times, not to me, but I've seen it in business happen, where somebody promises you to give something else, but nothing's exchanged for it. So this would be a perfect example. What if I came in every day to class 10 minutes late? It's an 8 o'clock in the morning class. I'm always coming in at 8:10. And say the president of the college sees me and goes, Jim, we really like how you teach the class. The students really like the business law class you teach. We think you're doing a great job, but it's a really poor reflection upon you and upon the college that you're coming in 10 minutes late Monday, Wednesday classes. We're going to give you a $5,000 bonus at the end of the year if you show up on every time to the rest of the semester. And let's assume they put a clock out there to prove it. So the rest of the semester, I'm really looking forward to that $5,000 bonus. I punch the clock. I'm always there before 8 o'clock on Mondays and Wednesdays for the rest of the semester. I go into the human resources. I'm looking for my bonus check, and they laugh at me and say, we're not giving it to you. I sue the college. Who will win? The college will win because they promised to give me $5,000. What did I give them? And someone can say, well, you showed up on time. I was already supposed to show up on time. I already had a contractual obligation to do so. And that comes up all the time. Maybe not in that specific example, but I'll give you the example that happened to a friend of mine, a carpenter. This happened many years ago, but I always love the story because I knew exactly what was going to happen when he came to my office. Because he was so happy. He was putting on his deck made out of, I think it was cypress, real fancy mansion in town, and I could see where his vehicle was, so I'd stop and talk to him sometimes when I was going back from court, and he was building this beautiful, beautiful deck. And he was bragging about it. He was really happy because the owners are very happy. They promised me an extra $2,500 bonus because it came out so great. And my friend's name is Buster. And I say, hey, Buster, that's great. About a month later, there's a knock on my office door. I say, hey, come on in. It's Buster. And I said, hey, we come down for coffee. He had a coffee for me, and my trademark, always having a coffee in my hand. And so what's going on? He goes, hey, remember that job I was doing? Right away, a big smile. He goes, yeah, I remember the job you're doing. That came out beautiful. He goes, let me guess. They didn't give you the $2,500 bonus. He goes, yeah, look, they got a nice letter saying what a great job I did. And whatever the cost of building that deck was, he gets that check and there's no more. He goes, what should I do? I said, give him a courtesy call. Say, hey, remember promising me that $2,500? Maybe they'll pay it. He goes, what if I don't? Can you take it to small claims for me? Or can you show me how to do it? I said, no. And he goes, wow, geez, that's really fun. He goes, well, the reason why I won't do it is because they promised to give you $2,500. What did you promise to do for them? You already had a contractual obligation to build this cypress deck to those standards. And what I taught him that day, and I'm trying to teach you today, is in the future, if somebody seems to promise you something new in the contract that benefits you, you should immediately say, because you're promising to do that for me, I'm going to do this other thing. I'm going to finish a day earlier. I'm going to put on 2 little solar lights at the top of the stairs where the banisters start to run. Something it doesn't have to be equal. It can be very disparate. $2,500 for, I'm going to finish a day early. $2,500 for, I'm also going to trim those shrubs right around the side of the deck to make it look nice and clean. Oh, for that, for the other $2,500, I'm going to put on a couple of those little friction pads on each of the steps going up so they won't slip when things get wet. $25 cost to you, but now they're contractually bound because it was a bargain for exchange. That's the whole concept of consideration. Something's bargained for. So promising what you already had to do is not consideration. And refraining or promising to refrain from something you have no right to do in the first place. The classic example I bring up on this one is the old story you're in high school and you're getting beat up all the time by the school bully. And you basically say, hey, I'll tell you what, I'll give you $100 at the end of the year if you don't beat me up every day at school. So the guy says, all right, I'm not going to beat you up. End of the year comes, you didn't get beat up all year. Guy comes and goes, got my $100. I refrain from beating you up all year. You could legally say, I have no legal obligation to pay you that $100, even if we wrote it all out and it was witnessed, because you already had a legal obligation not to beat me up. Now, that's such an obvious case. But there are other cases like that someone's refraining from doing something that they have no right to do anyways. You don't have any obligation to pay them. In this last one, past performance, and this comes up quite a bit. You do something really well. Like I say, I go to my friend's house and I do help him paint, just free. He's my friend. He's not a lot of money. I used to paint for a living when I was in college. I feel like I'm kind of very conscientious about painting. My nickname in the painting crew as a kid was Picasso, or also four-coat corpsman, they call me, because sometimes I'd go back and do an extra coat if I didn't like how it came out. It was slow as hell, didn't help us make a profit, but it came out nice. So anyways, I'm helping my friend paint his house because I just want to help him. And what if during the day, he tells me, hey, I got good news. I came into some money, or inherited some money I didn't think was coming into me. I'm going to throw you a couple grand, Jim, so you can go to the Cape, take a vacation with your kids. I'm like, yeah, that's really nice of you, 2 days later, I say, Cape season's kind of running along. I call my friend. Goes, hey, remember that $2,000 you said you were going to give me for me helping you paint your house? And he says, yeah, unfortunately, I went down to the liquor store and I bought a bunch of booze and a bunch of scratch tickets, and it didn't go so well. I drank all the booze. That's gone. and I lost all on a lottery ticket, so I'm not going to give you $2,000, Jim. Well, that might be unethical, might be immoral, might be offensive, but he had no legal obligation to give me the $2,000. Why? Because my painting wasn't ever in exchange for getting the $2,000. It was a promise given to me for something I already had done or already was committed to do. It comes up a fair amount of times. You'd be surprised. Or maybe not the example I gave where he blew it on scratch tickets and booze, but you get the drift. Performing something I said, no. Classic. Now we're going to get to some of the major exceptions. And one of the major exceptions is called the voluntary subscription. I always think this is where you subscribe to a magazine because that's what it sounds like. All a voluntary subscription is if you make a pledge to give money to a charitable organization that's recognized under law. They're usually called 501c3 organizations, I think. Charitable organization. You get moved by watching the Jerry Lewis telethon on Labor Day weekend. You call up, you pledge to pay $50. What are they giving you? Nothing. But you pledge to give money to a charitable or fraternal organization. That's actually legally binding because society, the legal fiction here is society benefits when we promise to give money to charitable, religious, societal organizations like that, and therefore it's enforceable. Most of those groups don't tend to sue on that, but what if you're a big corporation and you make a pledge to Shriners Hospital of $100,000 and there's a big media event, and then later you renege on it? Could Shriners Hospital sue you for the $100,000? Yeah, and the defense might be, well, it wasn't a contract because they weren't giving me anything in exchange, but Shriners Hospital does a huge benefit to young, often poor people that suffer from burns, and so therefore it benefits society is the argument. That's a voluntary subscription. Debts of record. If a court makes a judgment, you have to pay somebody $10,000. You can't defend on paying it later saying there's no consideration. It's just silly. Straightforward. But here's the huge wild card. The wild card in this one is called Promissory Establi. I can't sometimes cite that there was a promise in exchange for a promise. It didn't happen. But sometimes there's a promise to one party that is likely to induce the recipient of that promise to act in a way that if the promise isn't enforced, they'll be injured. And I always use my examples for me. I have this dream, again, living my daughter here, Martha. It's named after Martha's Vineyard. She's never been there, but my dream is to live on Martha's Vineyard. I guess commute every day to school on a ferry and bicycle or something. But what if I'm at some seminar or the sponsor of educators and there's people from Cape Cod Community College and we're hitting it off, and essentially we're looking for someone to teach political science or legal studies or something related to my educational experience at their college. And I'm talking about, my dream is to move down there. My kid will be out of high school in a couple of years. And they say, hey, you've got the job. It's yours. Leave your wife behind, sell the house, give up the job at the Mount in 3 years, give them your 3-year notice, sell your car because you're going to commute now on the ferry. You're just going to need a life jacket, maybe a bicycle to commute to Cape Cod Community College off the ferry. Do it. You got all these things. And I do all those things. I quit the Mount. I give them the 3 years notice. I sell my house. I buy a house on Martha's Vineyard. I do all those things on detriment, on reliance of that very realistic promise to me that I would be given a job at the Cape Cod Community College. Therefore, that promise might be enforced against me. This comes up a lot in employment contracts. So that's sometimes after like a second interview at a job. Sometimes they'll actually give you a form saying that you weren't promised any employment today, so you can't raise the fact of promissory estoppel. But listen to the elements of it. It's a very powerful tool. It's used all the time where you can't really show there's an existence of contract. A promise is made. The promisor reasonably expects the promise to induce action by the promisee. The party that received it, the promisee, does in fact act. And justice really requires enforcement. So say, for example, I got a pretty decent used car, but I'm doing pretty well. I don't really need the used car. I was thinking about selling it. And I see my friend's got a real jalopy. He's about to put new brakes on it. A new muffler system is going to cost him a fortune. If I say, just ride it to the end of the month. At the end of the month, you can take my 2012 Subaru. I don't really have much use for it. You're a good friend of mine. You just don't put the repair work in that thing. When the inspection sticker expires at the end of it, just bring it to the junkyard. Get yourself whatever it is you get for a junk car, $100, and you can take my car. You have to register it and insure it on your own, but it's yours. So give up that car. Don't look for other cars. Don't worry about working that second job for a while to make extra income so you can get a better car. This one's for you, and it runs great. Now that friend does do that. They don't put the repairs in the other car. They let it kind of go to hell to the end of the month. They wear it right down. They go and junk it and get the $100. Now they have no transportation. Now they come and go to pick up my Subaru and say, you know what? I realize I can get a few grand for that thing, a lot more in the market. I'm not doing it. And my argument legally would be, but you didn't promise to give me anything. There was no bargain for exchange. But I did make a promise to them. My promise was likely to induce action on their part. They did take action to their detriment. And wouldn't justice really require enforcement of that? Yeah, probably. So promissory estoppel is a big wild card in the contract world. Anytime you promise somebody something, if it induces them to act and you should have knew it was going to induce them to act, you might pay as a result of that. Now, this huge one should almost have its own chapter. It's called modification of a sales contract. Sales contract relates to anything that's a good. Ball bearings, phones, cups of coffee, lip rollers, anything, even staplers. Say I'm the company stapler, Staples. And I order from a manufacturer 100,000 of these staplers for $1.25 each. I'm going to sell them for $2.50 each after packaging and everything. I'm going to get a little profit out of them. And I'm Staples. I contract you, manufacturer. And I said, you know what? We really are going to have a tough time paying $1.75 for each one of those. I need you to reduce the price down to $1.30 for each one. And you turn around and say, all right, we'll do that. And let's assume we exchange. And now could the manufacturer sue for the original price, arguing that I've given them nothing new and they've given me the same amount of staplers? They should get the full original contract price. They've promised something new, take a lesser price, but they got no benefit. There's no consideration. So therefore it violates the law, right? Well, the law made a huge exception. For practical purposes, we recognize that if both parties want to agree when it relates to a good to change the price or the details of it without no consideration necessarily flowing, it only flows one side, only one side gets a benefit out of this new arrangement, the law is going to uphold it as long as it's been voluntarily entered into. Why? We just want practically people to freely agree to changing contracts when it relates to goods, even though there's no consideration flowing back and forth between the party. Major exception, it literally gets 2 sentences on page 83 of your book. Modification of sale contracts do not need new consideration to enforce them. It's huge. It's monumental. Don't get that wrong on the test. It's a multiple choice question on the next test. I know it is. Otherwise, I think I kept that relatively short. It's a fun chapter, something for something. Otherwise, it's not a contract. Be well.